The human population is growing, and this means there is more and more demand for Earth's resources. This documentary will give a brief overview of the state of world population and predictions for the future, and then look at some of the differing perspectives on handling a growing population in Australia and on a global scale. On October 31st, 2011, Earth's population hit 7 billion. Historically, the pace of human growth rate has been slow, taking thousands of years to reach 1 billion in only 1804. However, since then, we've been growing at an exponential rate. This graph shows in red the steep incline in the population in the last 200 years. From the 1 billion in 1804, it took 123 years to reach 2 billion, 32 years to reach 3 billion in 1959, and the population doubled between 1960 and 1999, reaching 6 billion. From there, it took just 12 years to reach 7 billion. Predictions on how much the human population will grow over the next 50 years or so fluctuate, with many variables that will influence the final count. The median prediction is to reach somewhere between 9 to 10 billion by 2050. It is said that 90% of this increase is set to come from the developing countries. With the increase in the number of people, so too there will be an increase in the demand on and competition for global resources. This could lead to shortages in water, energy, and food resources. More people also require more infrastructure, more roads. The population today is already putting a strain on resources, and adding the predicted 1 billion more by 2030 means we will need another planet if we were to sustain our current lifestyle. The question is then, what, if anything, should be done about reducing the growth of the population? There are a number of viewpoints on the issue of how to slow the population growth in Australia. We spoke with Mike Coddy, Stable Population Party candidate for the Warringah electorate, and asked him what are the party's policies or suggested solutions in regards to reducing Australia's population growth rate.
We're concerned with numbers only in the population party, the Stable Population Party. We see that is the most important and crucial step that we can make in terms of handing future generations an environment that is sustainable. If left to our own devices, Australian women on average have around 2 children each, and that means that births would equal deaths in the long term. So that if the government were to do away with financial incentives to have as many children as possible by limiting birth support payments to the first 2 children only, and then if we were to have a balanced migration policy so that the 80,000 or so Australians who leave Australia permanently every year were balanced with the intake, over time that would stabilise our population with great benefits across the board, socially, environmentally and economically.
Prominent Australian businessman Dick Smith has another approach, coming out and saying that in Australia we should be limiting the number of children per woman to 2. Smith is not proposing an enforced policy, but rather by saying it's best to have 2 kids. We spoke to expectant parents Thomas and Monique Hession and asked them what were the factors that influenced their decision on how many children they've decided to have.
So at this point we're considering having 3 children, so we'll start with 1 and see how we go. But the biggest defining factor for us as a couple would be more around financial rather than environmental. So just having the ability to give our children every opportunity in life rather than have a larger family and not be able to give our children that financial security.
We also asked them whether they thought the government should play a part in suggesting or enforcing limits on how many children a couple should have.
I think that regardless of who it is, that right for an individual shouldn't be taken away, and it should be that person's right whether they want to have as many children as they want. And with relating to the government, I don't believe that the government should put that type of limitation on a couple. And I think that there's other ways that we can deal with this issue rather than actually putting limit on someone's family also.
I agree that the government should not be providing financial incentives for women to have as many children as they can. However, the social and economic ramifications if the baby bonus was removed or limited might disadvantage those lower income families who rely on that money to support the newborn baby. In regards to suggesting it's best to have 2 kids, as Dick Smith has said, it is questionable that without a policy enforcing limits, how successful would the uptake be of such a suggestion in a land of people who value their freedom and liberties? As we saw in the interview with Thomas and Monique Hession, they believe it is an individual's right to decide how many children they have. Additionally, a decrease in the number of children per couple would create a reduced younger generation, and this could lead to issues in terms of them having to support an ageing population, which could also have social and economic consequences. A balanced migration policy might help reduce the population growth in Australia, but will it help humanity and the environment on a global scale? There could be environmental, social, and economic impacts if the world's population was concentrated to only certain parts of the planet. As seen, these viewpoints focus on a national scale. However, if the vast majority of population growth is to come from the developing countries, shouldn't we be putting our focus there? Statistics show that 40% of all pregnancies are unintended, with the share of this figure being higher in developing countries. We should be focusing on educating and assisting in family planning so that each pregnancy was a result of an intent to have a child. Using this strategy would result in a decline in the growth rate within a few decades. However, there is some worry that in reducing the number of children per family who might be needed to work on the land, provide income, or collect water could negatively impact on a family being able to meet their basic need. The data predicts that the world's population is going to continue to grow, but by how much and the impact that growth has on resources is still somewhat in our hands. Before I started researching this issue, I thought it was an impingement on human rights to set limits or even suggest how many offspring someone can have. However, I now believe we have a responsibility to the planet, to ourselves, and to future generations to reduce our impact and use on resources, and reducing human population growth may play a key role in achieving this.